up to the other issue, which is just like, as a white person, I just didn't understand what it meant to raise a black man. Like, to raise a boy who's going to be a black man in America. Like, I just didn't.
Can you help
I
me
just
with
didn't get
this?
that.
What, from your standpoint, because you've been through it and I know you've seen it happen other times, what motivates white people to adopt black children? I
Um,
know you can't speak for all of them because I hate when somebody asks me to speak for all black people. So I'm not asking you to speak for all white people, but if you can just give a little bit of insight, because I think that that is a conversation that people would, I want to learn, like, what motivates white people to adopt black children.
well, I think that there's a like, the first thing is like, oh, we can give him a good home,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a perception. I think white folks don't realize the, like, I just, as a white person myself, I just didn't understand how much that race plays a part in so many elements of life,
Right.
because I didn't see it. And
Right.
if you look at it from, now that's like black family, black friends, you realize
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, as I can't literally walk in your shoes or in your skin, but I can kind of see through your eyes sometimes,
Right.
and realize like, oh, race influences a lot of stuff that I didn't realize it did before.
Right. Right.
Like,
Right.
race is a
Right.
part of the race is in the room a lot of the times that I just walked right by it and didn't notice.
Yeah.
Uh, and so this perception that, oh, I can give them a better life, there's a racial component to that. Like, oh, I, as a
Thank God. Yes.
reasonably reasonably prosperous white person in a decent suburb outside of Philadelphia, can pluck an inner city baby, meaning black,
Mm-hmm.
like, because they're not up for adoption because they are coming from a stable. And this is where people don't think of it in racial terms. They're just like, you know, a child isn't up for adoption unless there's a struggle. They're not.
Right.
So there's this belief that you can give them a better home, but a better chance. But then there's also just a thoughtlessness about, like, what does it take to raise a black that race and culture matter deeply, and that they're
Yeah.
they're tied not just to the physical skin of a child, but to their ancestry, and to, like, it's there's enough difference between what, broadly, like, I'll just say, white suburban American culture, and, you know black culture, that those are distinct things. And
So let me ask you a question.
like,
Why
we don't
not?
get what it means to a people, in that, or to have connection to ancestors, or to, there's just like things that we just, there's like a feeling missing, a heart missing, a vibe missing, that's, it's not impossible to connect with it, but you have to be around black folks to connect with it. Like,
Yeah, thank you so much for your transparency and your vulnerability and your honesty in that. Because that is very challenging to see from the black side. I've seen a lot of, even before we came back to Philadelphia and met you and Tamika, who is your wife now, who is a black woman. I've seen a lot of um, so it's very challenging for me to say good hearted and good intention, because I think that a lot of people are that, but I'm still trying to put my hand on, um, we can give them a better home or a better life or better without knowing anything about them. Plus, so I just run all these dynamics through my head. Like, well, there are a lot of white children out there who need homes also, right? You
yeah,
know,
I was just gonna say that I think there's the other thing is that black children are available. There aren't white
explain
children
that
to
to me.
adopt. So so if you were to look, my understanding of this through talking with multiple adoption agencies, and this is going back 13 years, 14
Yeah.
years. But there's, at least in a place like Philadelphia region, there are, if you wanted a, like literally, like you have a menu, you got like white child, black
A
child,
menu.
boy,
I'm
boy,
sorry
girl,
to
right?
laugh at that. I'm sorry to laugh at that. But the way that you said it's like you have a menu, and I was like, wait a minute, hold on,
So
time
let's say
out.
you have your first choice is white child, boy,
Right, right.
or maybe white child, girl is your first choice, and they'll be like, listen, you can be on the waiting list for 15 years. Um, or I'm making up the number, but,
No, no, no.
or
I
it's
get
like,
that. I get that. Yeah.
or, but if it's black boy, man, we got like dozens of them available right now, you know?
That that
And
just that just poses so many questions for me. Here we go. Court system again, right? I know. I come from
this is not out of the
black.
foster system. If you
I
were
mean,
going to adopt
foster
out of the
system.
foster, if you adopt out of the foster system, then that's a whole different conversation. And again, it's, there's tons of black kids available
Right.
where you foster them and then they go through a legal proceeding to permanently take them from the parents and adopt them into your family. And I know at least one family that did that for several children.
So this
Um,
is challenging for me because I get what you're saying.
but
Um,
on the menu, it's like black kids. There's lots of them.
there's a lot on the menu. Yo, you are my guy. I love you because you are one of the only people that can handle me having this conversation with you, and I'm probably one of the only people that can handle you having this conversation with me. But here we go. One
That's
more
why I love
time.
you.
Yeah, I love you too, brother. Are there, so I start to ask myself questions, right? Because I'm like, okay, I know that levels of dysfunction in the communities are at similar rates, but the proportion argument is a big argument. There are less white people. I mean, there are less black people. Black people make up 13% of the population, whether that's shrinking or growing right now. White people make up more. I think it's about 44% or something like that. American
Right.
population, maybe a little more. And there are dysfunctions everywhere. There are a lot of white people who shouldn't have their children, and there are a lot of black
Absolutely.
people that shouldn't have their children. But the fact, and we may be talking geography here, even in the city of Philadelphia, because I'm thinking about going, because I've seen white people go to, like, they have kids coming from like Africa and all of these other places to adopt. And I'm like, but what about Billy Bob in rural Illinois whose
Okay. So
parents
yeah,
whose parents are addicted to meth? Is their child not available because the court system won't take their child as fast as they would a black person's child in Chicago? Or is there just not an interest to adopt
maybe
from a
there's not
white
a business.
counterpart?
Maybe there's not a business pipeline to get kids out of, out of the foster system in Appalachia. Like, I don't know. I
See,
mean, we could
and
do
you're
some
right, and you're
investigative,
right. You are so right.
because
You are so
there
right.
is a major business. It's just a nonprofit business. And what I wish, I'll say something that I'm not going to say I actually wish kids could be for sale, but I wonder whether, if you could sell children,
Oh Lord
meaning
Jesus, I'm following you, Landon. I'm following you. You are so
meaning
yes.
if if a young woman could sell her child into
Mm-hmm.
the adoption system,
Mm-hmm.
what would it look like? Could there be a kind of honesty and transparency about it that is all papered over right now with these nonprofit agencies and whatever? Because it does cost you $25,000 to get a child.
Right.
But that
Right.
$25,000 is not allowed to go to the mother.
Right.
It is able to go to this nonprofit.
It just makes me ask questions that I need to work through because they may not be real questions. Well, they're always real questions, but they may be super emotional and not intellectual. But it seems like America, whether it be children or not, has the tendency to sell black people at a quicker rate, and white people still have the tendency to buy. Right? You know what I mean?
That's
Because
amazing. That's amazing. So here's another thing: is it's like, I have some friends who are, um, they're basically a generation older than me, or half a
mhm,
generation older than me, and they have children they adopted internationally because let's say they couldn't have children of their own, or there was a reason, um, or they were just, in one case, they adopted an entire family and they already had a couple of their own children.
Mm-hmm.
That was in an era where it was either not permitted or was socially, like there was really strong pressure to not allow white families to adopt black children.
Mm-hmm.
In the sort of the adoption community, it's now, so they literally went outside, they went to China to adopt children because they were available.
Right.
Um, International adoptions was available, but they couldn't do domestic adoptions because black children were what were available,
Mm-hmm.
and they weren't allowed to adopt them. Like the agencies wouldn't facilitate it.
Right.
Now that's relaxed, so white families can adopt black children.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe another dynamic to this is all speculation, right? We'd have to look into the actual data,
Right.
but my perception is there's a whole lot of white couples
Mm-hmm.
who have resources one way or another who are looking to adopt. And so even if there are relatively pretty many white children, infants or children that are available, there's a really high, it's all these white couples are looking to adopt and they've got resources. And so the ones that are available, like it's a supply and demand thing. There's,
It's yes, but it's
and I
so
think it would be really interesting to find what the numbers actually are. But
yeah.
so all I can speak from is the perception, which is
Mm, mm,
if
mm.
you are open to adopting a black child,
Yeah.
you could adopt a black child just like this. There's a black child who's going to be available, especially if you've got your finger in a couple of different agencies, or like if you got a couple different realtors looking for houses for you,
Yeah.
you've got a couple different agencies looking for a child. If you're open to a black boy, you're going to get served first. If you're looking for a
Mm-hmm.
white girl, waiting for years.
And so here is I've asked a couple people this question, and you're probably the only one that have enough love um, to answer this question and not dodge me in the hallway every time you see me after I ask it or after I've asked it. But I asked some of my white counterparts for years, why do white people adopt black children but they don't like black people?
Mm.
Right? Like just in a general sense,
Well, because
right?
it's like puppies are cute or dogs are cute when they're babies, like a Belgian
Yo,
Malinois or
you are
whatever is
so dope. Like
right.
that's it right there. Like that
Like
is
black
it.
babies are cute,
Yeah, like it and a part of it is just like gotcha, right? Like you need us. You couldn't take care of your own, and so we had to step in. And the hard part about it is I do not believe that everybody who does this is ill intentioned, because there are black people who foster black children just for a check, right? Like everybody's going to do evil and have sin, but I do think that we play in to some of the bad societal norms of America when we get into this idea, especially when it comes to adoption and raising children. Because this is another thing I say. I see it all. I used to see it all the time. You have a perfectly, and black people don't know everything about black people, but we probably will know more about black people than white people know about black people, right? You adopt this
9%
black
of the time.
child, and your job now for this black child is to make sure that this black child is not only provided for in the world, but is safe in the world, that they know who they are, right? Not only in coming up in your family, but in their heritage and their culture. You've taken on that responsibility, and you adopt this black child, and there's no effort to bring alongside black people to help you raise this black child. You adopt it, and I'm not saying you, I'm saying, but just in general. You adopt this black child and you raise it as if it is white,
Right.
right?
And at some
And
point they realize, like, I'm different. It's like the
yes,
the ugly duckling or whatever. It's like, huh.
right. And and
I
and,
mean,
and there are
well,
little things.
adopted children, sometimes adopted children go through the same thing. They have that, like, what, Santa Claus isn't real moment,
Right.
like, oh,
It-
this isn't my real family, or
yeah. It's the
and it's
littlest things.
different for, it's different for each kid and for each family. Like some
Right.
families find like they're much more transparent and it makes it easier for certain kinds of things. But um, I
But
just
like,
want to
yeah,
be careful
no,
that,
no, I get
just
it. Let me do the talking then if you want to be careful because
no, no,
I
no. I
let,
was going to just say, like, I don't want to. The only thing I say to be that black babies are cute um, when they're little, uh, but I think it's also just this sense of. I mean, I can only really speak for myself. It's like I really didn't understand what it all meant,
mm,
what like how deep the implications were.
mm-hmm.
Um, that it's just like I'm going to raise him as part of my family, and I adore him, and he's my son. But I have really no. It has taken me years to start to realize like the world is not going to see him the way I see him,
Yes,
and to then
yes,
actually
yes, yes.
see fit like to think of it like to realize. I talked to a black man who was a dad of a bunch of boys that I knew through a dance class, let's say one of my other kids. I
Mm-hmm.
was like, you know what? Can I just tell you that I don't know what it means to raise a black man?
Yeah.
And he said the thing that he said to me was just realize that people in the world will see your son one way when he's with you, and they're going to
Mm.
see him and perceive him a different way when he's by himself.
Lord Jesus. And that is the work that I think lacks sometimes is that black families who are raising their children, let's just say at least okay. One of the lessons that we do not let our children leave the house without having is this is how the world is going to look at you as a black woman or a black man, right? And sometimes we may overeducate in there, sometimes we may
Mm-hmm.
overemphasize. But one of the things that happen is I think the parent is so consumed about what they can provide out of the good that they have, right? Out of what they can give to this child, just from them to this child and welcome them into this family, that they don't realize. Divided by Faith, the book says, black people think about race in the top three characteristics of how they define themselves. So for me, it would be Christian black male,
Mm-hmm.
right? Husband, father, and then it go on, right?
Right.
White people think about that. It doesn't show up to around number 14.
Oh, for sure. That's
So
something
you're
that
that's
really clear
something
for
that
me.
you
It's like
just
I
like
didn't even don't even think of myself as a white guy. Like that's not
exactly.
it. I only think of myself as a white guy because as I've gotten to know and like become family with black folks. Like it just then I realized like, oh,
Right.
my being white is a significant deal.
Yeah. And
Like,
so imagine raising a child up in a family, whether it be intentionally or unintentionally,
they're just
where they've
unconsciously
walked
white.
or unconsciously white, where they've walked through life with people that don't have to think about it until 14th. And they can be in the very same neighborhood, right? With you or without you doesn't mean college. It doesn't mean, it can mean that your son is not with you walking around your neighborhood. And if
Well,
that
literally,
book,
I literally experienced that. So like this man told me this,
yeah,
and then I started to see it,
yeah,
and so my son is, um, I've been on my own block and in you know comfortable suburban Philly,
mm-hmm.
and had my son be like 2 blocks ahead of me on a bicycle, and have one of my neighbors, like directly neighbors, walk out, encounter my son in a friendly sort of way, but basically saying like, "Are you lost? Where?"
Wow.
Um, and then I walk up and I'm like, "This is my son." And then there was sort of a laugh, and he was like, "Oh, hey, kid, you want to? I bet you can't ride your dad's bike, or like whatever." And he was like, "Oh, I can. Here,
Oh my
I'll show you."
God.
He's like, "I
Oh
bet you
my
ten
God.
dollars you can't."
Yeah.
Turns out he
Yeah.
was also he was drunk.
Yeah.
And I
Which
was
is
like,
even
"Wow, this is."
scarier. Thank God you came out there.
Yeah, but it just was like walked out. Could tell my son didn't belong, and you know proceeded accordingly. Like,
Man, yeah.
and it was
When
friendly. Like he
yeah,
had a
when you
friendly
say that.
tone, right? Like it wasn't dangerous. in the sense that he didn't call the cops on my son right away.
It
Uh,
wasn't
but it
dangerous.
was clear he didn't belong.
Right. So it wasn't. So even with that, right? Like it
Oh, I
wasn't
mean, it's still
dangerous
dangerous, right? It's still dangerous, but
to a white man. It was like, oh, it was friendly. To a
exactly.
black person, we like, oh boy, here we go, here we go.
Yeah.
He's being nice now, and
But my
here's the
son
key.
didn't pick up. My son was,
Oh yeah, he's too
he
young.
was young
He was
and
young.
he didn't pick up on it.
Right. Because that's the key word, right? Like that's the fight that a lot of when you realize it, even as a young age, as a young black male, that's the dignity dynamic that you have to take a lot of times when you end up in those places. Like, do I comply? Or and start saying, oh yeah, I live here, that's my dad over there, boom, 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 boom. Or do I stand up for myself and just be like, sir, if I was lost, I saw you over there, I would ask you for some help, right? I'm not lost. I live in this neighborhood. Please leave me, right? And so you have that, and that kind of scenario
Yeah.
doesn't end at boyhood, right? You know, my wife has a story of her brother when he was a little boy. They lived in West Philly. They would ride their bikes to Upper Darby, which was predominantly white at the time. The neighborhood is turned now,
Right.
and the cops would tell them, pulled them over one time, and told them, get the F out of here. You don't belong over here. Right. And so it's just like there
And this is
are,
1980s.
right. These, yeah, 1980s. I mean, I just saw a video on,
Right.
one of them Instagram or something in Jersey, where a group of black and brown boys are riding their bikes through a neighborhood in New Jersey. The cop is following them. The cop gets out of the car and says, go back to the north side. Right. And he's just like, but we aren't doing anything. Like, so it's just those very things right there. And that cop will go home and have a black son in his house.